The shuttle doors opened with a soft hiss. Jake Morrison stepped out onto the metal floor of Kepler Station, his small backpack hanging from his shoulders. The 12-year-old boy looked around with wide eyes at the massive space station that housed the most important military school in the galaxy. Colonel Lisa Hayes walked beside him, her Earth uniform looking plain next to the colorful clothes worn by aliens from dozens of different worlds. She put her hand on Jake's shoulder as they walked through the busy corridors filled with strange creatures. "Remember what we talked about," she said quietly. "You're here to learn, not to prove anything to anyone." Jake nodded, but his eyes were busy watching everything around him. Tall, blue-skinned aliens with 4 arms moved past them. Huge, rock-like creatures that stood twice as tall as any human stomped down the hallways. Flying beings with wings like butterflies floated near the ceiling. The Galactic Military Academy had been the most exclusive school in known space for 300 years. Only the smartest and strongest from the best species ever got to attend. The Zephyrians sent their tactical geniuses. The Kraulan warriors sent their mightiest fighters. The Nexari sent their most advanced technology experts. And now, for the first time ever, a human child was walking through their halls. Commandant Vextar stood in his office, looking down at the application on his desk. The massive Kraulan warrior was covered in thick, gray skin that looked like stone. His red eyes glowed as he read the papers again. "A human child," he said to his assistant, Commander Kelvin. "Age 12. No special abilities. No enhanced strength or speed. No advanced brain modifications." The Nexari officer's silver face showed no emotion. The human government called in their most promising candidate. Perhaps they have some hidden potential we don't know about. Vextar laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. Or perhaps they're making a joke. Humans have been in space for less than 50 years. They barely know how to fly between planets, let alone fight wars among the stars. Then why accept the application? "Politics," Vextar said with a shrug. "Earth wants to feel important. We let their child attend for a few weeks. He fails every test, and then we send him home. Everyone stays happy." Jake and Colonel Hayes reached the main entrance to the academy. The doors were 30 feet tall and covered with symbols from every major species in the galaxy. As they opened, Jake saw the Great Hall for the first time. The room was enormous, with a ceiling that seemed to stretch up forever. Hundreds of young aliens sat at tables, eating strange foods and talking in languages Jake had never heard. The sound was like nothing he had ever experienced, clicking, buzzing, roaring, and singing all mixed together. "There he is," whispered a young Zephyrian cadet named Zex-High. His compound eyes focused on Jake as the human boy walked through the hall. The human they enrolled as a joke. "He's so small," said Throg, a young Kraulan whose stone-like skin was still light gray instead of the dark color it would become when he grew older. "I could crush him with one hand." "Maybe that's the point," said another cadet. "Maybe humans are supposed to be crushed." Jake heard some of the whispers, but didn't let them bother him. He had expected this. Colonel Hayes had warned him that most aliens would not take him seriously at first. That was okay. He was used to being underestimated. The next morning, Jake attended his first class, Basic Combat Strategy. The instructor, a tall Nexari named Captain Nelvin, looked at Jake with obvious doubt. "Today, we will run a simple battle simulation," she announced to the class. "You will be divided into teams and given control of small fleets. Your goal is to defeat the enemy force using standard tactical formations." Jake was put on a team with 3 other cadets who clearly didn't want him there. They were given control of 12 ships and told to attack an enemy force of the same size. The simulation began, and Jake watched as his teammates used the tactics. They had been taught It was a disaster. The enemy force destroyed half their ships within minutes. Jake's teammates started shouting at each other, blaming everyone but themselves for the failure. But Jake just watched the screen, studying the patterns of movement, the way the enemy ships responded to different attacks. "Human," one of his teammates said angrily. "Why aren't you helping?" "I'm learning," Jake said calmly. "Learning?" "We're losing," Jake nodded. "I can see that." The simulation ended with their complete defeat. Most of the class laughed at their failure, especially at the human boy who had done nothing but watch. But Captain Nelvin noticed something strange. While his teammates had panicked and made stupid mistakes, Jake had remained calm the entire time. After class, she gave the students a tactical puzzle to solve. It was a problem that had stumped cadets for years: how to move a supply convoy through enemy territory without being detected. Most students spent hours trying to solve it and failed. Jake looked at the puzzle for 10 minutes, then wrote down his answer. Captain Nelvin read it and frowned. The solution was completely different from anything she had ever seen. Instead of trying to hide the convoy, Jake had found a way to make the enemy want to avoid it. His answer was so strange that she almost marked it wrong, but when she ran the simulation, Jake's solution worked perfectly. Not only did the convoy reach its destination safely, but it actually caused the enemy to retreat from the entire area. For the first time since the human child had arrived, Captain Nelvin looked at him with something other than doubt. Maybe, she thought, there was more to this small human than anyone had realized. That evening, Commandant Vexstar received a report about Jake's performance. The boy had failed the combat simulation completely, just as expected. But his solution to the tactical puzzle was being studied by the Academy's best strategists. "Interesting," Vexstar said to himself. "Perhaps this won't be as boring as I thought." Jake sat in his small room that night, looking out at the stars through his window. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, and new opportunities to prove that humans belonged among the stars. He wasn't worried about failing. He was excited about learning. The joke, he thought to himself, might end up being on everyone else. 3 weeks had passed since Jake Morrison first walked through the doors of the Galactic Military Academy. The human boy still looked small and weak compared to his alien classmates, but something had changed in the way he moved through the corridors. While other cadets rushed to their classes, Jake walked slowly, his eyes constantly moving. He watched how the Zephyrians used their 4 arms work on multiple projects at once. He studied the way Krallen cadets moved their massive bodies with surprising grace. He noticed how the Nexari never seemed to waste any motion or energy. "The human is always staring," complained Throg during lunch. The young Krallen was getting annoyed by Jake's constant observation. "It's rude. Maybe he's trying to figure out how to beat us," suggested Zexhai. The Zephyrian's compound eyes clicked as he looked across the cafeteria at Jake, who was eating alone while reading a tactical manual. "Beat us?" Throg laughed. "He can barely keep up with basic training. Yesterday, he couldn't even lift the standard combat pack." But Zexhai wasn't so sure. He had been watching Jake too, and he had noticed something strange. The human boy was terrible at physical tasks, but his mind seemed to work differently than everyone else's. In their strategy classes, Jake would ask questions that made their instructors pause and think. The real test came during their 4th week in Advanced Fleet Tactics. Commander Kelvin had designed a special simulation for the class. Each cadet would command a small fleet against overwhelming odds, a classic Krallen battle formation that had never been defeated in over 2 centuries. "This exercise is designed to teach you about acceptable losses," Commander Kelvin explained, her silver face showing no emotion. "Sometimes victory requires sacrifice. Your job is to minimize damage while achieving your objective. One by one, The cadets tried and failed. The Krallen battle formation was simply too strong. Even the best students could only manage to complete part of their mission before being destroyed. Then it was Jake's turn. The human boy looked at the tactical display for a long moment. The enemy force was massive, battleships and cruisers arranged, in a formation that had been perfected over centuries of warfare. His own fleet was tiny in comparison. "Begin simulation," Commander Kelvin announced. Instead of attacking directly like the other cadets, Jake did something unexpected. He ordered his ships to retreat toward a nearby asteroid field. The other students laughed. Running away wasn't going to solve anything, but Jake wasn't running. He was thinking as the enemy fleet followed him into the asteroid field. Jake began to implement his plan. He used the asteroids like a three-dimensional maze, forcing the larger enemy ships to break formation. When they did, he struck, not at their strongest ships, but at their supply vessels and communication relays. "What is he doing?" whispered one of the watching cadets. "He's using the asteroids to split their formation," HFY said, his voice filled with surprise. "But that's not supposed to work against Krallen battle tactics." Jake's small ships darted between the asteroids like fish swimming through a coral reef. The massive enemy battleships tried to follow, but they were too big and slow. Every time they tried to regroup, Jake would attack from a different angle, always targeting the ships that held the formation together. Within 30 minutes, the legendary Krallen battle formation was falling apart. The enemy ships were scattered, confused, and unable to coordinate their attacks. Jake's tiny fleet began picking them off one by one. Commander Kelvin watched in stunned silence. The simulation was supposed to be impossible to win. She had used it for years to teach students about the reality of warfare, that sometimes you had to accept defeat and minimize losses. But Jake wasn't accepting defeat. He was rewriting the rules. The simulation ended with complete victory for Jake's forces. Not only had he defeated the enemy fleet, but he had done it without losing a single ship. The classroom was completely silent. "How?" Commander Kelvin asked finally. Jake stood up, his young face serious. "The formation was designed to fight in open space, where their size and firepower would be advantages. But in the asteroid field, those advantages became weaknesses. Big ships can't move quickly through small spaces." "But the asteroids were dangerous to your ships too," protested Throg. "Yes," Jake agreed, "but my ships were smaller and more agile. The danger was manageable for me, but not for them. I turned their strength into a weakness." Commander Kelvin stared at the human boy. In 30 years of teaching, she had never seen anything like this. Jake hadn't just won the simulation. He had done it using tactics that no one had ever considered before. Word of Jake's victory spread quickly through the academy. Within hours, every instructor knew about the human child who had defeated the unbeatable Krallen formation. Some were impressed. Others were worried. "This is problematic," Commandant Vextar said to his senior staff. "The boy's tactics are completely outside standard doctrine. He's not following the rules." "Perhaps," suggested Captain Nelvin, "the rules need to be updated." The Krallen commander's red eyes glowed with anger. "The rules have worked for 3 centuries. They are based on the proven tactics of the greatest military minds in galactic history. But they didn't work against a 12-year-old human," Captain Nelvin pointed out quietly. That evening, Jake found himself surrounded by other cadets. For the first time since arriving at the academy, they peppered him with questions about his tactics, his strategy, his thinking. "How did you know the asteroids would work?" asked HFY. "I didn't know," Jake admitted. "I just thought about what would happen if I tried it. The worst case was that I would lose, which was going to happen anyway if I fought them in open." "Space, so you were willing to risk everything on an untested idea?" Throg asked. Jake shrugged. Sometimes the safest thing to do is take a risk. The young Kralin thought about this for a long moment. In his culture, strength and proven tactics were everything. But Jake had just shown that sometimes being unpredictable was more important than being strong. Over the following days, Jake's influence began to spread. Other cadets started asking him for advice on their tactical problems. They began to see that the human boy's strange way of thinking could be useful, but not everyone was happy about Jake's success. Some of the older cadets, especially those from the traditional military species, felt threatened by the human's unconventional methods. "He's making us all look bad," complained Kralvis, a senior Kralin cadet. "The instructors are starting to question everything we've been taught." "Maybe what we've been taught isn't perfect," suggested another cadet. Kralvis turned on him angrily. "Kralin military doctrine has never failed. This human child got lucky once. That doesn't mean he knows better than centuries of proven tactics." But even as he said it, Kralvis felt a doubt creeping into his mind. Jake's victory hadn't looked like luck. It had looked like genius. As Jake walked back to his room that night, he could feel the eyes of other cadets following him. Some looked at him with respect, others with suspicion, a few with fear. He didn't mind. He was here to learn, and he was learning more than he had ever expected. Not just about military tactics, but about how different species thought, how they approached problems, and how they dealt with change. The academy was about to learn that having a human student meant more than they had bargained for. Jake Morrison was just getting started. 4 months had passed since Jake Morrison first arrived at the Galactic Military Academy. The human boy who had been enrolled as a joke was now the most famous cadet in the galaxy. News of his victories had spread to every world, and his tactical innovations were being studied by military leaders across known space. But with fame came danger. Jake sat in his room, reading reports from Earth. Colonel Hayes had sent him updates about the political situation back home. Some alien governments were demanding that humans be excluded from advanced military training. They claimed that human tactics were too unpredictable and dangerous. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Zeeks-High entered, his compound eyes reflecting worry. "Jake, you need to be careful," the young Zephyrian said. "I've been hearing rumors. Some of the senior cadets are planning something." "What kind of something?" "They want to prove that your victories were just luck. They're talking about challenging you to formal combat." Jake set down his datapad. "That's allowed under Academy rules?" "Only if the Commandant approves it. And there's talk that he might." Before Jake could respond, his communication device chimed. It was a message from Commandant Vexstar. "Report to my office immediately." The Commandant's office was filled with senior Academy staff when Jake arrived. He recognized most of them, the professors who had taught him, the instructors who had watched his simulations, and the administrators who ran the Academy. "Cadet Morrison," Vexstar began, his voice more serious than Jake had ever heard it. "The Academy Council has made a decision regarding your unique situation." Jake waited, sensing that something important was about to happen. "Your success has created political problems throughout the galaxy," continued Professor Kethfer. "Several species are questioning whether the Academy's standards have become too low. Others are demanding that human military doctrine be officially recognized. To settle this matter," Vexstar said, "the Council has designed a final examination specifically for you. It will be broadcast to every world in the galaxy, and the results will determine humanity's place in galactic military affairs." Commander Kelvin stepped forward. "Jake, you should know that this test is designed to push you beyond your limits. The Council wants to see if your tactics work against the most advanced military artificial intelligence ever created." "What kind of AI?" Jake asked. "It's called the Eternal Strategist," Vexstar explained. "It contains the tactical knowledge of every great military leader in galactic history. It knows every battle, every strategy, every successful tactic ever used. And it will command forces 3 times larger than yours. Jake thought about this for a moment. When do I take the test? Tomorrow. The entire galaxy will be watching. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He walked through the Academy's corridors, thinking about the challenge ahead. He had faced difficult opponents before, but never anything like this. The Eternal Strategist would know everything about military history, while Jake only knew what he had learned in 4 months at the Academy. He found himself in the observation deck, looking out at the stars. Earth was somewhere out there, a small blue world that had only recently joined the galactic community. Tomorrow's test would determine whether humans would be respected as equals or dismissed as lucky amateurs. Can't sleep either? Jake turned to see Throg approaching. The young Krallin's stone-like skin looked darker in the dim light. "I wanted to tell you something," Throg said. "When you first arrived, I thought you were weak. I thought humans were inferior to Krallin warriors. And now I know I was wrong. You've taught me that strength isn't just about physical power. It's about seeing possibilities that others miss." Jake smiled. "Thanks, Throg. That means a lot. I'll be watching tomorrow." "We all will." The next morning, Jake entered the Academy's main simulation chamber. The room was packed with cadets, instructors, and visiting dignitaries from across the galaxy. Cameras were recording everything for broadcast to billions of viewers. Commandant Vextar stood at the center of the chamber. Today, Cadet Jake Morrison will face the ultimate test of military skill. He will command a battle fleet against the HFY Eternal Strategist, our most advanced artificial intelligence. Jake took his position at the tactical console. The display showed his forces, a small fleet of cruisers and destroyers, outnumbered 3-1 by the AI's massive armada. "The scenario is simple," Vextar announced. "Total warfare. No rules, no limitations. Victory goes to whoever destroys the enemy first." "Begin simulation," came the voice of the Eternal Strategist. It sounded calm, confident, and completely emotionless. The battle began immediately. The AI's forces moved with perfect coordination, their formations flawless, their tactics drawn from centuries of successful military campaigns. Jake's smaller fleet was scattered across multiple star systems, facing attacks from all directions. Within minutes, Jake had lost a quarter of his ships. The watching audience began to murmur. This looked like the beginning of a massacre, but Jake wasn't panicking. He was thinking. The AI was using classic tactics, proven strategies that had won countless battles throughout galactic history. But that was also its weakness. It was predictable. Jake began to implement his own strategy. Instead of fighting the AI's strengths, he would create situations the AI had never encountered before. He started by doing something that went against all military logic. He scattered his remaining ships even more, making them appear vulnerable and disorganized. The AI took the bait. It began to pursue Jake's ships with overwhelming force, confident that it could destroy them easily. But Jake was leading it into a trap. Using a combination of asteroid fields, gravity wells, and stellar radiation, Jake began to create tactical situations that existed outside the AI's historical database. When the AI tried to respond using traditional methods, it found that they didn't work. "What is he doing?" whispered one of the watching professors. "He's fighting the AI's programming," Commander Kelvin realized. "He's not trying to win through superior tactics. He's trying to make the AI defeat itself." The battle's turning point came when Jake did something that no military leader in history had ever attempted. He deliberately crashed one of his own ships into a small moon, causing it to break apart and create a debris field that blocked the AI's sensors. The AI had no historical precinct for this kind of tactic. It tried to adapt, but Jake was already 3 steps ahead. He used the confusion to launch a coordinated attack on the AI's command ships, disrupting its ability to coordinate its forces. Impossible, the Eternal Strategist said, and for the Z. First time, there was something like emotion in its voice. This tactic does not exist in any military database. That's because I just invented it, Jake replied. The rest of the battle was a masterclass in creative destruction. Jake continued to use tactics that had never been tried before, always staying 1 step ahead of the AI's attempts to counter him. He turned the AI's vast knowledge against it, making it overanalyze situations where simple responses would have worked better. In the end, the Eternal Strategist's fleet was completely destroyed. Jake had achieved total victory using methods that existed nowhere in military history. The simulation chamber fell silent. Then, slowly, applause began to build. It started with a few cadets, then spread to the instructors, and finally to the visiting dignitaries. Even species that had opposed human inclusion in the academy were impressed. Commandant Vextar approached Jake, his red eyes glowing with something that might have been pride. Cadet Morrison, you have just accomplished something that will be remembered for centuries. You have proven that human military thinking deserves a place among the galaxy's greatest tactical traditions. I just used what I learned here, Jake said simply. No, Vextar replied. You used what you brought here. Your human ability to see beyond the accepted limits of possibility. As Jake left the simulation chamber, he was surrounded by reporters, cadets, and military officials. Everyone wanted to know how he had defeated the unbeatable AI. The Eternal Strategist knew everything about military history, Jake explained. But history is about what happened in the past. I was more interested in what could happen in the future. That night, Jake received a message from Earth. It was from Colonel Hayes, and it contained news that would change his life forever. Jake, the message said, the Galactic Defense Council has voted to offer you a position as a tactical consultant. They want you to help them prepare for threats that traditional military thinking can't handle. Jake looked out at the stars, thinking about the journey that had brought him here. 4 months ago, he had been a joke. Now he was being asked to help defend the galaxy. The human child who had been enrolled as a joke had become something new. One had expected a military genius, whose ideas would reshape how the galaxy thought about warfare. But Jake knew this was just the beginning. The real test would come when he faced enemies that weren't simulations or artificial intelligences, but real threats to the peace and safety of countless worlds. He was ready for whatever came next. 6 months after Jake Morrison first stepped onto Kepler Station, the Galactic Military Academy was preparing for the most important graduation ceremony in its history. The human boy who had been enrolled as a joke was about to become the youngest. Graduate in Academy records. Jake stood in his small room, looking at the dress uniform that had been specially made for him. It was blue and silver, with insignia that marked him as a distinguished graduate. Tomorrow, he would walk across the Academy's great stage in front of representatives from every major species in the galaxy. A soft knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Colonel Hayes entered, wearing her own dress uniform. She had arrived from Earth 3 days ago to attend the ceremony. How are you feeling? She asked. Different, Jake said honestly. 6 months ago, I was just a kid from Earth. Now everyone expects me to have answers to problems I've never seen before. Colonel Hayes sat down beside him. Jake, what you've accomplished here has changed everything for humanity. Before you came to this academy, we were seen as newcomers who didn't belong among the stars. Now we're being invited to join the Galactic Defense Council. That's a lot of pressure. Yes, it is. But remember, you don't have to carry it alone. Earth stands behind you, and you've made friends here who will support you too. Jake nodded, thinking about Zexhai Throg, and even some of the instructors who had become his mentors. He wasn't alone, even when it sometimes felt that way. The next morning dawned bright and clear through the station's artificial day cycle. The Academy's Great Hall had been transformed for the graduation ceremony. Thousands of seats were filled, with cadets, instructors, and dignitaries from across the galaxy. Commandant Vexstar stood at the podium, his massive form imposing even in dress uniform. "Today, we graduate a class that includes the most remarkable cadet in Academy history," he began. "Jake Morrison has shown us that military excellence comes not from following old rules, but from having the courage to write new ones." As Jake's name was called, he walked across the stage to receive his graduation certificate. The applause was thunderous, lasting for several minutes. Representatives from dozens of worlds stood to honor the human boy who had changed their understanding of warfare. But the ceremony's biggest surprise came when Vexstar made an unexpected announcement. "The Academy Council has voted to offer Cadet Morrison an unprecedented honor," the Commandant said. "At age 12, he will become the youngest instructor in Academy history, tasked with developing new tactical curricula that incorporate human military innovation." Jake felt his heart skip a beat. He had expected to return to Earth after graduation, not to stay at the Academy as a teacher. "Furthermore," Vexstar continued, "the Galactic Defense Council has requested that Jake Morrison serve as a special consultant on unconventional warfare tactics. He will help prepare our forces for threats that traditional military thinking cannot address." The audience erupted in applause again. Jake looked out at the sea of faces, alien beings from across the galaxy who were now looking to a human child for military leadership. After the ceremony, Jake found himself surrounded by reporters and officials. Everyone wanted to know about his plans, his ideas, his vision for the future of galactic military doctrine. "What will you do first in your new role?" asked an XRA journalist. "I want to establish exchange programs," Jake said. "I think every species has something unique to contribute to military thinking. Humans aren't better than anyone else. We just think differently. Imagine what we could accomplish if we combine Zephyrian tactical analysis with Krallan strength and Nexari technology." "Some critics say that human tactics are too unpredictable to be reliable in real combat situations," challenged another reporter. "How do you respond?" "Unpredictable tactics are only a problem if you're fighting against them," Jake replied. "If you're using them, they're an advantage. The goal isn't to be predictable. It's to be effective." Later that evening, Jake attended the traditional graduation dinner. He sat at the head table with Academy leadership and visiting dignitaries, still amazed at how much his life had changed. ZEX single quotes HA. I approached his table during dessert. "Jake, I wanted to thank you," the young Zephyrian said. "You've shown me that there's more than one way to solve any problem." "You taught me things too," Jake replied. "Your analytical skills helped me understand tactical situations better." Throg joined them, his stone-like features showing what might have been a smile. The human and the Zephyrian, teaching each other. "My father would say this proves the galaxy is changing." "Is that good or bad?" Jake asked. "Good," Throg said, firmly. "Change means growth, and growth means we become stronger." As the evening progressed, Jake found himself in conversation with military leaders from across the galaxy. They asked detailed questions about his tactical theories, his approach to problem solving, and his vision for future military development. "The key," Jake explained to a group of senior officers, "is to remember that every limitation can become an advantage if you think about it differently. When I was smaller and weaker than my classmates, I learned to use my size as an asset rather than see it as a weakness." "How do you apply that to military strategy?" asked a Krallan general. "Instead of trying to match enemy strengths, you find ways to make those strengths work against them. A larger fleet is more powerful, but it's also less maneuverable. Advanced technology is impressive, but it can be complicated and vulnerable to simple solutions. The conversation continued late into the night, with Jake sharing insights that would influence military thinking for generations to come. 3 days after graduation, Jake stood in the Academy's Communications Center, preparing for a video call with Earth's military leadership. His new position required him to coordinate with his home planet's defense forces. "Jake," came the voice of General Parker, Earth's highest-ranking military officer. "Congratulations on your graduation and appointment. The entire planet is proud of what you've accomplished." "Thank you, sir. I'm ready to begin my new duties." "Your first assignment is already waiting," General Parker continued. "We've received intelligence about a potential threat in the Outer Rim territories. Pirates using unknown tactics that have defeated several patrol fleets. The Galactic Defense Council wants you to analyze their methods and develop counter-strategies." Jake felt a familiar excitement building in his chest. This wasn't a simulation or a training exercise. It was a real problem that needed a real solution. "I'll need access to all available tactical data," he said. "Battle recordings, survivor interviews, technical specifications of the ships involved. You'll have everything within the hour. Jake, this is your chance to prove that your methods worked in actual combat situations, not just Academy simulations." After the call ended, Jake walked through the Academy corridors one more time as a cadet. Tomorrow, he would return as an instructor and consultant. But tonight, he wanted to remember what it felt like to be a student. He found himself in the observation deck, where he had spent so many nights looking at the stars and thinking about tactical problems. But now, instead of wondering if he belonged among those stars, he was planning how to protect them. Colonel Hayes joined him at the viewing window. "Any regrets about staying instead of coming home to Earth?" "No regrets," Jake said. "This is where I can do the most good. Besides, Earth isn't going anywhere. I'll visit when I can. Your parents are proud of you, you know. So is everyone back home." Jake smiled. "I hope I can live up to their expectations." "You already have. The question now is what you'll do next." Jake looked out at the stars, thinking about the challenges ahead. He would help train a new generation of military officers who would approach warfare with fresh perspectives. He would work with the Galactic Defense Council to address threats that traditional tactics couldn't handle. And he would continue learning, because in a galaxy full of different species and new challenges, there would always be more to discover. The human child who had been enrolled as a joke had become something no one had expected. A bridge between different ways of thinking. A catalyst for change, and a symbol of what could be accomplished when species worked together instead of apart. But most importantly, Jake Morrison remained what he had always been. A 12-year-old boy who wasn't afraid to ask questions, challenge assumptions, and imagine better solutions to difficult problems. As he watched the stars, Jake knew that his greatest adventures were still ahead of him. The galaxy was vast, full of mysteries and dangers that would require all the creativity and courage that humanity could offer. He was ready for whatever came next. The joke, after all, had become the future of galactic military doctrine. And Jake Morrison was just getting started.